Thank you for the opportunity to come and present. As I see it, I've got the fairly easy job today. Bob gave me more credit than what I deserve in terms of reworking some of this science. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I am all about plagiarism. I'm just copying the science and applying it to our own system. So hopefully what you guys take out of this presentation today is what we at the Maschhoffs have done to take the work that Roger talked about, that Scott talked about, and particularly some of the impacts that Daniel just discussed, and applied it to our decision-making process when it comes to PRRS management in our system. And certainly I want to thank the Maschhoffs health team. Dr. Lowe is here today. He deserves a lot of credit for this thought process, as well as Drs. Thompson, Stellick couldn't be here today. But this is certainly reflective of group thought, so if you don't like it, please blame Jim. Okay, so big picture. I want to talk to you guys about why PRRS is so important to our system and why these decisions on how we're going to control or eradicate virus and what we're going to do in order to control that virus or eradicate it ultimately impact our system from both a biologic performance standpoint and a financial standpoint. I want to give you guys a little bit of history about what the Maschhoffs has historically done for PRRS management in our system. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with the Maschhoffs, it's a system that's grown fairly rapidly in the last 10 years. And the things that we did 5 and 10 years ago on the health side, much like on the genetics, nutrition, environmental side, are not what we're doing today. So I want to show you guys how the science, as it's evolved, has impacted our decision making. I want to talk to you guys about how we've used these PRRS impact estimates that Daniel's provided, and particularly the value of prior immunity, and also the impact of the use of a modified live virus versus live virus for our exposure programs. I want to show you guys the historical performance on the previous or the historical program, and as well as the current performance on our updated PRRS management strategies, how's that's playing out for us, and then bring you guys to the conclusions that I think we can draw from this. Okay, so big picture. At the Maschhoffs, what we're asked to do is to support optimal health management of our herd. And I think that's generally true for any veterinarian in any system or any practice. Ultimately, our job is to make recommendations to the producer on how to manage their herd in such a manner that is economically sustainable, that makes them viable in the long term, and also that's socially sustainable, that protects our social license to produce food. That is sometimes challenged by the lack of ideal evidence available to support our decision making. Certainly we've been exposed to this virus for over 20 years now, and we still don't know how to optimally manage it, as Daniel just explained to us. There's still tremendous variation in the results that we have of our various strategies, so we've got a lot to learn there. And I think never is this lack of evidence more painfully aware to both the veterinarian and the producer than in the face of a PRRS outbreak on a sow farm, on what we call a breed-to-wean farm. It's a very bad day for everybody involved. There's a lot of finger pointing, there's a lot of decisions that need to be made in a hurry, and it helps to be grounded if you have some basic science to come back to support that decision making, so you're not always making decisions in the face of the tyranny of the urgent. I want to talk to you guys about 2 key decision points that our team has to make when we have a novel PRRS infection on a breed-to-wean farm. The first of those decision points is, what is our long-term goal with this farm relative to PRRS virus? Do we want to control the PRRS virus and maintain an antibody positive status, or do we want to eradicate this virus and get rid of it and take the farm back to a naive status? That's the first question that you have to answer. The second is, how are we going to do that? I'm going to talk to you guys today specifically about load, close, and expose protocols. I understand depop, repop is an option, hard roll is an option, do nothing is an option, and everything in between. But I want to talk to you guys specifically about load, close, and expose. We'll assume that that's the path that we're going down. And then within that, question number 2 is, are we going to use live virus, field virus from that break, or are we going to use a modified live virus to expose that herd? So historical PRRS management decisions at the Maschhoffs. As I mentioned, the Maschhoffs has grown wildly. And to say that 5 years ago we had a decision-making model for PRRS control on a sow farm would probably be overstating it. But we did sit down and think about the impacts that our decision was going to have on pre-weaning performance and on post-weaning performance. Post-weaning performance is very important in our system. We sell grade A pounds of pork. We don't sell wean pigs. We don't sell feeder pigs. That's how we make money. is grade A pounds of pork. So post-weaning mortality is a very important consideration when you're making sow farm decisions. Now, generally, this decision-making was not a model, as I said. A lot of times it was a whiteboard discussion between Steve, Jim, and I, and I'm sure Aaron and Jim before I was there. But we valued heavily this post-weaning mortality impact. We knew that PRRS virus in our wean pigs had an economic cost to the system, and that cost could most easily be measured in the mortality increase that those PRRS positive lots we created were. So we wanted to strive to get back to PRRS negative production out of that sow farm as soon as possible and maintain PRRS negative production. We wanted to make sure that we had the virus out of the sow farm and that it was never going to infect a pig post-weaning. We knew there was probably a chance that how we got the virus out of the sow farm had a PSY impact, whether it was MLV or LVI or any of the other variables. We also knew there was a chance that there was value in prior immunity, that having an antibody positive status in our herd might be a good thing for herds that rebreak regularly. But we didn't know how to value those. So historically, we didn't put a value on them. We just assumed they were equal. Ultimately, that led us to making decisions that were very sensitive to how quickly could we get the virus out of the sow farm and how quickly could we keep it out of our post-weaning population, or how could we keep it out of our post-weaning population long term. And so ultimately that led us to generally elimination decisions that valued this time to stability. And Daniel expressed it in time to negative pig production, same thing, TTNP or TTS, whichever term you want to use. But the TTS in this situation will be measured by the time it takes to get to the AASV Category 2B status. So our model results were very consistent. We wanted to eliminate the virus with targeted immune stimulation. And ultimately that took us to a load, close, and expose LVI model. That was our historical decision making, how we got rid of virus and kept it out on our sow farms. So I've put together some very basic economics up here. You can apply your wean pig value as you see fit. I know everybody in here would probably like to buy wean pigs for $40 today. They're significantly higher, obviously. So that shifts over time, but I would tell you the model is not terribly sensitive to wean pig value, but plug in your own assumptions. They should be the same, certainly for MLV or for LVI. Then put in your time to stability. How many weeks on either program do you expect to have time until you get negative pig production or reach that 2B status? We've used a 6-week difference here between MLV and LVI, and as Daniel just mentioned, with LVI driving to time to stability faster than MLV. Wean pig volume is going to be the same in both considerations, and the value of prior immunity, as I mentioned, we value as none. PRRS virus discount on a post-weaning basis per wean pig, we picked $7. Again, like the wean pig price, pick the number that makes sense to you. Pick the number that's most applicable for your client, for your situation, but ultimately they should be the same between MLV or LVI. And then there's a little bit of cost, of course, in the LVI program in actually exposing those sows versus LVI, which is a little bit cheaper to make. So ultimately that landed us on a net value of per 1,000 sows that we were about $20,000 positive on the LVI program, entirely because of that 6-week difference of negative pig production and the 6 weeks faster on the LVI program. So historically, that was what led us to the load, close, expose LVI program. Okay, so I want to fast forward now to the updated PRRS impact estimates. I have the privilege of working with BI on their veterinary liaison group. It's been a wonderful experience for me to get exposed to the Daniels of the world. Scott D's been a member of that group and also shared information with that group. They bring in wonderful content experts on diseases like PRRS and give us updates that I wouldn't otherwise maybe get. And Daniel came to our group in November of 2012, and he gave us a presentation that was very timely. November of 2012, there was a lot of PRRS activity. It was a faster PRRS year than what we've seen this year. And we had a lot of decisions to make on herds that had recently been exposed to PRRS. And what Daniel talked us through was this time to negative pig study, which I knew was going on, but I didn't know the depth at which he had categorized herds based on their exposure method, the MLV versus LVI. I didn't know that he'd categorized herds based on their prior immunity value. That was really interesting to me. And ultimately, he had measured both of those treatment programs based on time to baseline production or this time to stability. So this is wonderful information that I'm going to now have as evidence to apply to my decision making, and I can update that very basic model that I showed you before. So I think it's good here to address some of the limitations of the time to negative pig study. Like any research, it is not without the ability to shoot some holes in it. The first and foremost is that the herds were not randomly allocated to treatment, as Daniel said. So there's certainly an observational analysis piece to this. And as I often try and remind myself, association does not infer causation. You can't just directly tie those things. So always think about that with a grain of salt. There's also high variability and low control of the loading, the exposure, the sampling methods from one herd to another. The time to baseline performance estimates make some major assumptions, especially around what else is going on that farm. Just measuring wean pig volume is certainly something that many other factors can influence: genetics, environment, diet, all those things that we know that change, other disease factors. And those factors ultimately weren't controlled in this study. Despite all those limitations, we live in a world where we generally don't have a lot of information, and our team at the Maschhoffs does view this as the best available information for the inputs in this decision model at this point. And until better evidence gets presented, this will be the inputs that we'll continue to use in our decision making. So I want to talk to you guys about the impact estimates that Daniel gave us specific to time to stability first. As he mentioned, significant variability exists. That was very comforting to me, certainly something we saw in our own system. Some herds would quiet down very quickly, other herds would drag on and on and on and leak virus out into the post-weaning population for much longer than what we liked, but that variability appears to exist across the industry. Regardless of that variability, you can make two significant associations. The first, as Daniel mentioned, was that herds exposed with LVI reached that time to stability significantly faster than herds who'd been exposed through MLV. The second is that breed-to-wean herds with prior immunity had achieved time to stability significantly faster than comparable herds without prior immunity. That was very interesting for me to hear because, as I said before, we hadn't valued that prior immunity in our previous decision making. So this was the first opportunity I saw to improve our model. The next piece I want to talk to you about is the time to baseline performance associations that Daniel presented to us. Several key pieces of information here. The first, as he mentioned, was the time to stability was poorly correlated with time to baseline performance. That was a surprise to me, quite honestly. I did not expect that. I assumed that what was good for the sow farm was good for the post-weaning population, that those two things would be correlated, but clearly they don't appear to be. The second is that time to baseline production was highly correlated with the total pre-weaning losses. That, again, was very important for me because I hadn't valued the PSY impact of those two different control programs. And I certainly hadn't valued it relative to the prior immunity. So that allowed us some more information to make decisions with. The prior herd immunity is correlated with the earlier time to baseline performance with a drastic increase in the total wean piglet production relative to PRRS naive herds. So prior immunity has a real value. If you take nothing else out of this presentation, please know that our group sees that value today, and in a minute we'll run through the math behind what we think that value means. Breed-to-wean herds using the modified live virus approach reach time to baseline performance significantly faster than herds using LVI. So another piece of information that's got to go into our model. Okay, for these model assumptions that I'll roll out here in just a second, I think it's important to note that, again, we're only talking about a load, close, and expose program. We're assuming that these herds have the same minimum criteria that Daniel defined for his time to negative pig study, and that we're also assuming that sow farm flawlessly implements McRebel program or their PRRS management strategies throughout the time of herd closure. Two very important questions. Remember what we first talked about in this presentation. The first question is, what's your long-term plan? Are we eradicating the virus? Are we going back to an antibody negative status? Or are we maintaining an antibody positive status in the herd? And does that antibody positive status, its presumed drag, performance drag over time, outweigh the improved output? Where is that point of inflection where the herd has to be exposed on a regular frequency that insurance policy of antibody positive pays for the theoretical performance drag associated with it? Second question is, once we know whether we're in a control herd or eradication herd situation, how are we going to get there? Is it through the MLV exposure or the LVI exposure? And does the total baseline performance, the wean pigs out the door, improvement in MLV, overcompensate for the longer duration of PRRS virus shedding in the MLV approach? So LVI gets you negative pigs sooner. We know there's a cost to having positive pigs longer with MLV, but is the total wean pigs out the door going to overcome that marginal cost of more PRRS positive pigs over time? So the first question on value of prior immunity. You can see we've broken this down into having either immunity or no immunity on the sow farm at the time of a novel PRRS break. You've got your cost of that outbreak with the no immunity situation and the prior immunity. Apply the wean pig value that you see fit, and then we use the lost wean pigs median value for those two categories in Daniel's work as of November of 2012. And you can see the drastic difference on a per thousand sow basis of the wean pig performance with prior immunity in place. You take your cost of your wean pigs times those lost pigs, and ultimately you get a value lost in that outbreak, significantly less certainly in the prior immunity situation. So you've got to weigh that with this cost of your insurance premium, so to say. We assumed, complete assumption on our part, this is expert opinion and probably not even very well informed expert opinion, but the PSY drag from immunity, we estimated at being 1 on prior immunity. That's the cost you're going to pay annually to have an antibody positive status in your sow herd. Certainly no cost in the prior immunity situation, but so that's your insurance premium. And then ultimately to figure out this value that's created, the difference between these two numbers, what is your break frequency? How often does that bad event have to happen that your insurance policy is worth investing in? And so you take the value created divided by the annual premium, and that comes up with a number that on very basic math gets you to about 1 break every 3 years. So a historical break frequency of once every 3 years or less would lead you to a control program where you maintain the antibody positive status, or greater than every 3 years, you're probably better off to eradicate on that farm. Okay, question number 2. Once you've decided what you want to do, you understand the value of prior immunity, MLV versus LVI. Do you want negative pigs faster, or do you want more pigs out the door? And what are the economics associated with those? Plug in your wean pig value again, whatever's appropriate for your situation. In this case, we used median numbers again from Daniel's study in 1,300 off of a 1,000 sow situation for improvements in wean pigs over the course of herd closure in an MLV program on that 1,000 sows, so a 1.3 PSY improvement. The value of increased wean pigs, therefore, becomes a little over $50,000. You compare that to the delta between your PRRS impact in both situations. More pigs coming out, but more PRRS positive pigs coming out. And what's that worth to you? You can see that we've got our number of pigs per week post-infection, that $7 estimate on what that impact is worth, or what the PRRS impact cost us post-weaning. You get your time to negative production, 6-week difference between the LVI and the MLV. You get the total number of pigs weaned on either of these programs. Okay, you've got 4,000 more pigs weaned in the MLV program, but that's 4,000 more PRRS positive pigs weaned. And so what is the lost value due to PRRS post-weaning on all those pigs in the MLV program compared to the LVI program? And so there is your increased cost of weaning PRRS positive pigs, about $30,000. A couple $1,000 again in your MLV cost. And so ultimately, when you compare the value created in using MLV versus the value lost in having more PRRS positive pigs go out into your post-weaning population, you can see that the net value of MLV comes in at about $20,000. On 1,000 sows, that's not a massive amount of money, but that's not a small amount of money either. Okay, so to summarize this, you can see that we've had 2 significant shifts in our PRRS management strategy from historical to current. The first is the exposure method now in our system is exclusively MLV. We value the rapid time to stability as actually being less than the value of the rapid time to baseline production. The volume of wean pigs out the door drives the cost in this situation. Your PSY estimates are really sensitive in that equation, and changing that PSY as fast as you can ultimately is going to create the most value. We also now use PRRS control in some cases instead of exclusively pushing for PRRS eradication. And you can see we make that break right around 3 years. Greater than three years on a historical break frequency, and we're going to go with eradication. Less than 3 years, we're going to go with control. In our herds, I think you'll find this as well, it works out fairly well that most of our herds are either in very dense areas where they break once every 12 to 18 months, or they're in generally non-pig dense areas where their break frequency is more like once every 5 years, once every 10 years. So we don't have a lot of those herds that fit in the 1 every 3 year category, which makes this a pretty nice break in our system. I think it's important to note that the outbreak frequency is very tough to make an estimate of. We use historical break frequency in our system unless we have some specific information relative to a change in pig density around that farm, relative to a change in technology. Scott talked about filtration. Have you filtered? Have other people filtered in the neighborhood? And then also you could use your biosecurity scoring system, whether it's the 1,000-point score, the pad wrap. There are many ways in which you can value biosecurity, and you can adjust your outbreak frequency assumption based on improvements in biosecurity over time. Okay, I want to show you guys our historical performance, and this is simply me communicating to you guys what has happened on our farms. This is not controlled research. This is just me sharing performance data on the historical program that was exclusively LCE with an LVI, and the new program, which is load close exposed with an MLV approach. And I want to show you guys that this will only be for herds that have achieved PRRS Category 2B status. So if they never got to 2B for whatever reason, they didn't qualify for this, and only herds where we had post-weaning mortality data available. You'll see that I'm going to represent time to stability, time to baseline performance, and post-weaning mortality increase for both of these. Time to stability is defined as the number of weeks from herd closure until Category 2B designation. Time to baseline performance is the number of weeks from herd closure until you hit your baseline wean pig volume for that particular sow farm. We used a 12-month baseline, the 12 months of prior performance, weekly wean pigs, as our baseline for this particular situation. And then the post-weaning mortality increase is simply the post-weaning mortality for 6 months of wean pigs immediately prior to the PRRS diagnosis, compared to the post-weaning mortality for the 6 months of weaned pigs immediately after PRRS diagnosis, before and after. Okay, this is the historical performance chart. Load, close, and expose with an LVI approach. You can see significant variability, as Daniel reported, in time to stability. Also, pretty significant variability in the time to baseline performance. Also, quite a bit of variability in post-weaning mortality increase. That tells me what we already know. PRRS virus is extremely variable. Your current health status, your population of animals that are impacted, how frequently they have been impacted before, as we now understand previous immunity is so important, creates this noise within this data set. But you can see very, very easily with a mean, we had 33 weeks on the time to stability, 27 weeks on the time to baseline performance, and about 1.4% per week. So that's increased mortality after the break. 0.14% increased weekly post-weaning mortality after the break using our historical program. You can also see a lot of variability in our diagnosis date and the time from that to the closure date. I think that's important to take a look at on here, and something we'll talk about here in another couple of slides. But you can see some farms, we worked very quickly to close the farm down and get the farm closed and exposed. Other farms, we weren't quite as quick. Other farms, it took us 6-7 weeks to get that done. So we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second, and how that may impact time to stability in particular. I apologize. It looks like we're only going to see farms 1 through 8. There are a couple more farms on here, and unfortunately the averages are all at the bottom. I don't remember them quite off the top of my head. To give you a quick summary, I'll give you the bad news first. The post-weaning mortality increase is slightly higher in this chart. And some of you guys might have seen me present this at Layman. Unfortunately, all the farms that are on the lower part of the slide you can't see here are the ones that would be updated. So for those of you guys that saw this at Layman, I'd hope this would be an interesting slide for you, but unfortunately you're seeing much of the same. But 0.17% is where the post-weaning mortality increase mean is, so slightly higher than what we had on the old program. And then the time to baseline performance and time to stability, interestingly enough, we have actually improved both of those metrics. So while we expected the time to stability to actually increase going to the MLV program, we have improved that. While we expected the time to baseline performance to decrease, we've seen that decrease as well. So fairly happy with that. We currently use a time to stability of 36 weeks in our model. We're consistently lower than that, and if I remember right, we're in the 27-week range on this chart as a mean. So we're very happy with that, to the point where we might even consider updating our model to drop that time to stability estimate. Time to baseline performance has improved as well. I don't remember off the top of my head. I apologize. Anybody who wants a copy of these slides, please touch base with me. I'd be happy to get them to you. Okay, I mentioned before that there's quite a bit of variability between when we get the diagnosis and when we actually get the herd closed. And one of the things that I wanted to take a look at was, how does that impact the time to stability? So one of the things that I think you can see from this chart is one of the quickest ways to impact your time to stability, which remember is measured in terms of your herd closure to your category 2B, is just to delay your herd closure. It turns out that if you let the PRRS virus move through that population a little bit, it slows down when you're going to hit category 2B because you're starting off a little bit later. Presumably the infection has already swept through most of the herd, and your inoculation is really just making sure that you don't have any little pockets of naive sows out there. But you can see that as we move to longer time lapses between the diagnosis and the herd closure, so does our time to stability go down. And you can see when you change, this y-axis over here is the weeks between the herd closure and time to stability. In this next chart, I'm simply going to change the y-axis to being now weeks between PRRS diagnosis and time to stability. And you can see that that is fairly consistent, fairly flat, doesn't change a heck of a lot depending on your time to herd closure. So I think ultimately, when we're talking about time to stability and MLV and LVI, in some ways this tells me that tincture of time is more important than that decision probably, that the animals just need a certain amount of time, and in our system, apparently between 30 and 40 weeks from the diagnosis date to when they actually get the virus out of their system and reach 2B status. And certainly you have outliers, but it seems to be fairly consistent there. So that made me wonder, would we see the same sort of association when we looked at the time to baseline performance? And unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot here. I've got the slides in here, but when I look at this, it does not look terribly exciting to me. Similar axis again, weeks between PRRS diagnosis and herd closure on your x-axis. Y-axis is weeks between herd closure and time to baseline performance. I don't see a heck of a lot there. It looks like as you get out a little bit more, it might drop it a little bit. When we go to the next chart, which again is similar to the last two charts, just changes from weeks to, the previous chart was weeks from herd closure to time to baseline. This is weeks from PRRS diagnosis to time to baseline. It looks like you may not want to delay the herd closure from a time to baseline perspective, which I can get my head around that somewhat makes sense. We want to get the farm back on a path to recovery as soon as possible, and implementing these strategies is ultimately going to have some sort of impact, whether it's MLV or LVI, so getting that done as soon as possible makes sense to me. Okay, I do not have performance slides, unfortunately, for the value of prior immunity. We certainly recognize that similar to our LVI versus MLV approach, we want to monitor that, we want to CIP that with time, and we want to understand in our system, do we see that value in prior immunity that Daniel's research tells us should be there? I think we owe it to our stakeholders at our company to update our model assumptions and CIP that process with time. Given that we have recently adopted this practice, we do not have PRRS control farms that have rebroke since the PRRS control strategies have been implemented, and subsequently have the data from those rebreaks to see if that looks better than their previous performance when they had been naive and broke. But certainly recognize the value of that data. We'll continue to monitor it and look forward to sharing it to you guys formally or informally in the future. So conclusions. While ideal evidence to support PRRS management decision-making on a sow farm doesn't exist, there is an ever-growing body of evidence that's out there. The work that's being done by Roger, by Scott, by Daniel should be consulted regularly, and I think the veterinarian should understand the updated information before he makes a recommendation on a PRRS management plan. The time to negative pig study provides some performance impacts that you can use in your decision-making process, specifically as it relates to the time to stability, the time to baseline performance, and the use of LVI or MLV for exposure. That time to negative pig study also provides performance impacts in the face of prior immunity or lack of prior immunity on that sow farm. So it helps your decision on going from control or an eradication program. The time to stability and the time to baseline performance estimates can be used to create biologic models of pig performance to which you can apply marginal economic values to create financial models out of, and ultimately help your producer make a quality decision in terms of what PRRS management plan is going to be most economically beneficial for their situation. Through the time to stability and time to baseline performance estimates, homogenizing a sow herd through MLV results in more value generation than exposure through LVI, in spite of LVI shortening resulting in a shorter time to stability. So I'd say that's take home number 2. I mentioned before that the value of prior immunity is take home number 1. Please remember that if you remember nothing else. I would say number 2, the second most important thing that I've learned out of all this is that even though LVI gets you to time to stability faster, the value created cannot overcome the lost wean pigs that we see in the LVI situations. And last, using the time to stability and time to baseline estimates, maintaining a PRRS antibody positive status results in more value generation in our simple economic model than PRRS eradication on a breed-to-wean farm that experiences a novel PRRS outbreak more frequently than once every 3 years.